Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for our speaker series. And my name is Doug Orr. I am the chair of the local group of Sierra Club, Woods and Wetlands. Woods and Wetlands is in the most northeast corner of Illinois. We cover Lake County, parts of Cook, and a little bit of McHenry County. And just to let you know, we will be recording tonight. If you don't wish to have your face on screen, if you go to the lower left-hand portion of your screen, you can stop the video for yourself. With that, Thomas, could you give us the introduction?
Great, thank you, Doug. Welcome to another in a series of monthly program meetings sponsored by the Woods and Wetlands group of the Illinois chapter of the Sierra Club. All our online meetings are free and open to the public, though registration is required. You'll find us online at 7 p.m. on the second Sunday of every month. In a moment, we will hear from our featured speaker this evening, Erika Hasle, a scientist with the Field Museum of Chicago. Erika will speak on monarch butterflies and other pollinators that are crucial to our food chain, and on the importance of milkweed, which monarchs rely on for their habitat and diet. Immediately following Erika's presentation, we will hear from our very own Bruce Glickson, who will tell us how we can get involved in planting more milkweed and saving the monarch butterfly. First, though, we have a couple of announcements. As Doug said, we are recording this so that you can watch it in the future. Please make sure you are muted, especially if you have a barking dog, a television, or other commotion in the background. Feel free to ask any questions of our speaker by using the chat room at the bottom of your screen and typing in your question. We will select questions afterward and put them to the speaker. Also, you'll want to make a note of our next meeting on June 13. We will hear from Nick Snyder, the manager of the REI store in Vernon Hills, who will teach us how to get started in outdoor camping. After the conclusion of our program tonight, I will briefly summarize other forthcoming speakers. Now, let's move on to our featured presentation this evening. We are so very fortunate to welcome Erika Hasle, a scientist at the Field Museum of Chicago, to talk to us about monarch butterflies and other pollinators, and about the importance of milkweed, which monarchs use to lay their eggs. We know monarch butterflies for their striking orange and black wings and impressive migratory journey from Canada to Mexico. They also play an important role as pollinators in ecosystems. But monarch populations are in trouble. They've decreased more than 80% over the last 2 decades as their habitat of milkweed and nectar plants declines throughout North America. Erika will present findings of research by the Field Museum and others on successful urban and suburban habitats for monarchs and other pollinators. Erika is a conservation ecologist with the Field Museum's Keller Science Action Center. She has a bachelor's degree from Roger Williams University and a master's in natural resources from the University of Michigan. Again, feel free to ask any questions of Erika or any of our speakers by using the chat room at the bottom of your screen. And remember to stay online afterward to hear from Bruce Glickson as to how you can get involved in saving the monarch butterfly. Erika, we are so happy to have you join us tonight. Welcome to Woods and Wetlands. The microphone is all yours.
Thank you for having me. Let me get my slides going. It's always that awkward moment where you're introducing yourself, but you're also trying to do smart technology things. And share the correct screen, not, like whatever else you got going on. All right, so I am presenting. I have you all in the right place. So yes, thank you for having me. So in general, I usually title my talks as something like supporting nature in the greater Chicagoland, because it's all connected, and I hope that that comes through in my presentation today. So that was a great introduction and kind of makes this directional slide not as necessary, but I'm going to talk a little bit about why somebody from the Dinosaur and Mummy Museum is talking about butterflies, and why I'm specifically talking about butterflies and insect conservation in cities. where it's not always where we think about that. What we at the museum and our projects are doing for urban wildlife in general, and 8 things that you can do. So I am from the Field Museum, seen here with our race native gardens, which if you haven't visited in a few years, we like to say by square footage, this is now the largest exhibit at the Field Museum featuring,
Erica, we're still seeing loading.
interesting, still seeing loading.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, well, but that's not presentation mode. All right, so how, now are you seeing it?
Nope, it's loading.
Okay, so let's stop share. This is interesting. Oh boy. So this is a first error for me, but let me bring the slides up again. If we can always do them in not presentation mode, but they don't look as good. It's my work email.
That's fine not to use presentation mode.
Yeah, well, let's give it one more shot, partially because I already closed it, and I have some fun animations and stuff. I wanna share them. And this has never happened before, so I don't want to drag Google, but I think it's probably Google's fault, not mine. Okay, share that. Hit present.
There we go.
All right, how's that?
No, still says loading.
That's weird. It's like it pauses the sharing when I do that. Sharing is paused. Bring your shared window to the front. It is in the front. Stop share. I mean, it couldn't be any more in the front. It's the only window I have open. Click the exit. All right. Well, if we have to go without presentation mode, we'll go without presentation mode. All right. Share that screen. I mean, it is like.
There we go.
All right. Well, anyway, so.
Wait, I have an idea. Erica,
Yeah.
why don't you close it again, go back to your desktop and start it on your desktop. And
Yeah,
then
let's
share.
try that. I can't remember. Okay, new window. This is so weird. Partially because I have I like to stack your faces on top of the presentation so that I feel like I'm talking to an audience rather than I'm alone in my office. So there is a 7-year-old going to bed in the next room, and I don't think you'll hear that, but if you do, it's just a 7-year-old going to bed. So let's do this. Maybe that's what I did wrong. Maybe I go present here, and then I go share screen, share that screen. Maybe that's what I did wrong. Okay, how's that?
Excellent.
Okay.
Oh,
All right. Well,
Perfect.
All right. So that learning, no matter how many times you do this, and it worked fine when we did it before we started. So, okay. So here's the where we're going slide with the beautiful monarch butterflies. And here's a field museum with the rice native gardens, which by square footage are our largest exhibit featuring native plants of the greater Chicagoland region. So I highly recommend it if you haven't visited. And so the Field Museum, we say that we're fueling a journey of discovery. I'm bringing your faces to the top now because that makes me happy. Okay. The Field Museum is fueling a journey of discovery to enable solutions for a brighter future rich in nature and culture. And it's that intersection of nature and culture that is really important to my work. I think it's really important to a lot of conservation work because, of course, nature is always a part of our cultures. And I think the way we access talking about conservation is through people's culture. And as Thomas said, I work in the museum's Keller Science Action Center. That's our department. And our whole deal is translating the awesome science of the museum and the awesome power of our collection into action for conservation and quality of life. And again, it's the end of the sentence, the quality of life, that to me is really important because you can't have good conservation if the people around it don't have a good quality of life. And I would argue that having good conservation is key to having a quality of life. And so hopefully you see that that's something we try to weave into all of our conservation work. And all of this really began long before I started at the museum over 25 years ago with just 1.5 people starting working in the Andes Amazon. We've grown to over, right now we're like over 30 people. And my colleagues in the Andes Amazon have protected over 26 million acres for conservation. And they did that in collaboration with the indigenous people and other folks that live in and around that conservation land. And it's working with people that live in and around conservation land that is what we think is the secret sauce of doing good conservation. I work here in the Chicago region where we don't have 26 million acres to protect, but we have over 10 million people in the greater Chicagoland region. And it's the decisions that those 10 million people make that really drive what happens for wildlife and conservation. And so it's been my work in the last decade to collaborate with people in the Chicago region on conservation and connections to nature. And a lot of that work has happened south and west sides of Chicago, Northwest Indiana, and the Calumet region. And I also work in Kankakee County. And I can talk passionately about conservation in Kankakee County for longer than we have today. So these are some of my colleagues that work specifically on monarch and pollinator stuff. Doug Stotts may be the most well-known of us, who's an ornithologist. And if you have not gotten to see Doug talk about birds, I highly recommend it. He's phenomenal and literally wrote the book on some South American birds, but is incredibly knowledgeable ornithologist here. Also my colleague Abigail, who's one of the early folks at the museum working and advocating for pollinator stuff. And oh, the other thing to say about this slide, I included people's titles because we bring a diverse group of people together. So we have people with titles like community engagement specialist, like educator. I don't know how I didn't get a social scientist on here because social scientists are a huge part of our team. And I feel like I am missing one. But we also have folks like myself who really think about geography and spatial things. And you'll see a lot of maps in this talk because I love maps. So we know that cities need nature. We build our cities in beautiful places and we build into them beautiful landscapes. But it's been a much more debated thing. Does nature need cities? And often people will present cities and nature as opposite ends of a spectrum. Usually cities are pictures of concrete and big buildings and not a single person in those photos. And then nature is presented in beautiful landscapes like this without a single human creation in them. And I disagree with that presentation, in part because there are a lot of cities in the United States. Over 80% of Americans live in a city, whether they feel like they do or not. There are over 300 cities with over 100,000 people in them in the United States, and they cover a huge amount of land. And it's not like the land outside of a city is beautiful, unspoilt nature. A lot of it is hardworking, hard-used agricultural land that can be a tough place for wildlife to live. And so what happens in these cities is important. And more importantly, the decisions and opinions of 80% of Americans are a big influencer of what happens with conservation. And this is happening globally. Globally, we're becoming more urban. I say this before COVID. Who knows what will happen after COVID and remote work. And so feeding into this was a special section in the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that came out in either late 2020 or early 2021. It's all a blur to me. And it really focused on global insect decline because what's happening with the monarchs isn't unique to the United States. And included this graphic that I really like, and I've kind of simplified the words around it just so it fits better on a PowerPoint slide. But it talks about, globally insect decline. It's so rarely when we're losing a species can we point to just one thing and say it's just that. We had kind of the DDT and birds and predatory birds, but for the most part, there's rarely one cause. And so you could look at a figure like this and say, oh, well, like all of those things are really people. And yes, but you can also look at it and say, boy, there's a lot of different decisions we as people could make that could really benefit insect conservation. And I want to highlight that this one of a guy fertilizing his lawn next to fertilizer is not a mistake. So lawns are the largest irrigated crop in the United States by a large margin, not just a little bit, bigger than corn and beans, bigger than orchards, all of those. Similarly with fertilizing, we think of agriculture and runoff from agriculture is a big input of fertilizer into our waterways, but lawns are a big, big, big part of that. and it's individual decisions. It's not, we can't make one policy shift and change that. So I'm going to come back to this figure again, just because I really like it. And I think it highlights a lot of things. The other way to think about it, when we talk about insect decline, aside from a really long special section in proceedings, is this idea that, you know, maybe we're all taking more drives now that a lot of us are vaccinated, and it's spring in the Midwest. And it used to be that you had to stop and clean your windshield off for bugs. And I mean, we drove down to Springfield to get COVID vaccines, and you know, that didn't happen. And it's been a slow decline, not something that you notice. And you know, I've lived in Chicago long enough to remember that, like, on the lakefront, every couple of weeks, some new insect would be birthed from the lake, and you get covered in flies. And it still happens, but not to the same degree. And I'm not old enough to remember when monarchs used to just be in clouds across the landscape. But people tell me that, you know, I'm going to talk about monarch decline for a long time tonight. But every single person here could see a monarch this summer if they want to. It's not like they're impossible to find, but they used to be ubiquitous, covering the landscape. And so it doesn't feel like, you know, it's not like, oh, there's only 200 California condors left. There are still insects on the landscape, but there are dramatically fewer. And so when I talk about pollinators, and so I will reveal the secret now, that all of this work at the museum began about 6-7 years ago. And we really wanted to do a project on pollinators, because overall we knew pollinator decline was happening, and pollinators are incredibly important in cities, as we like food. And cities could do a lot for pollinators in the way that, you know, you're not going to have like bison habitat in a city, but making habitat for insects is quite a bit easier. And so when you look up the most important and prolific pollinators on the landscape, you get a lot of things that nobody was going to invite us to give a talk about. No one has ever asked me to come give a talk about midges. No one wants to hear about the importance of mosquito conservation. But these are important pollinators. And I'm not saying this to drag monarchs. Monarchs aren't the most important pollinator. No one thing is the most important pollinator. Monarchs are pollinators, but there are a lot of other pollinators. And so 6 years ago, nobody was interested in wasp pollination or, ooh, let's save the flies. You could get a few people to talk to you about bees, but 6 years ago, still, no one really wanted to talk about bees besides honeybees that are very managed. They live in colonies. We call them like the cows of pollination because they're European honeybees, and they're very important for pollination. They're very important for agriculture and food production. But native bees at that point weren't really something that was discussed, and there certainly wasn't something that we could find funding for. But we could find funding to work on monarchs. And part of the reason for that is that every year, people send me awesome photos of their kids with a monarch butterfly on their arm. And no one has ever sent me a picture of their excited child holding a bee. And I've said this a lot in talks, and I've still never been sent the photo of the kid with a bee. But also, monarchs are a really important cultural connection for a lot of people. There have been monarch butterfly festivals since long before any conservationists were talking about monarch butterflies, because monarch butterflies are incredibly important to people from Michoacan. They arrive around the Day of the Dead. They're an important cultural connection. They also make a significant migration across a really fraught border. Every year, no matter what's happening politically, monarchs make that migration. And so they are really important, inspiring species. And as I have hinted, they are a migratory species. Oh, well, so I have to say one more thing that kind of breaks up my story. But I mean, Thomas kind of said this in the introduction. Monarchs eat milkweed when they're caterpillars. So like a lot of insects, they have different needs at different parts of their life stages. So in order to have adult monarchs, we need to have milkweed. But we can't have just milkweed because adults drink nectar from flowers. So you could have a field of milkweed and not sustain monarchs because you don't have flowers all year. And you could have every flower on earth blooming across the year and not sustain monarchs because you don't have milkweed. And that's part of why they're a great species to talk about pollinators and conservation, because when we build things for monarchs, we're building things for all those other pollinators. If we build a good monarch garden that is going to be sustaining to monarchs, we're building habitat for other species. And the other reason to talk about monarchs is they make this amazing migration. And so I worked on migratory species for my master's work, and I've worked on a few other migratory species in my career. And they're really great way to talk about big conservation issues in a way that makes sense to people and that is kind of uniting. And so by talking about monarch conservation, I get to talk about habitat for the entire eastern United States into southern Canada and parts of Mexico. And I can't do that if I'm talking about rusty patch bumblebees, which are also incredibly important, and we can definitely talk about those in the Chicagoland area, but they don't cover that entire habitat. I can't do that with Karner blue butterflies, who are incredibly important and have this fascinating relationship with ants and lupins, but they live in very specific areas. And so monarchs, there are two populations of monarch butterflies in North America that I'll talk about. The eastern population, which are the ones here, east of the Rocky Mountains. And so if you see a monarch in late August, early September, that is probably a migratory monarch. Those are being born up here in the upper Midwest and all the way into southern parts of Canada. They will migrate all the way, those individual butterflies will migrate all the way down to central Mexico in Michoacan, state of Mexico, where they will overwinter on Omael trees. And then in February, early March, they will start moving into northern Mexico, southern Texas, where they will breed, lay eggs on milkweed plants, die. That next generation will be born and migrate up into Nebraska, Missouri area. Often there's a breeding there, and then it's the next generation that makes it here. Sometimes that first generation makes it all the way here. It very much dependent on weather and whatnot. And so then we'll have 2 or 3 generations here, and those great grandchildren will find their way back to the same Omael trees, having themselves never been there. So it's a pretty fascinating migration. We call it the migratory phenomenon. It's definitely one of the things that drew people to thinking and writing about monarchs long before the conservation issue. There's also a western population west of the Rocky Mountains. They have their own migration sort of here that is mostly happening in the United States, and they're overwintering along the California coast, a little into Baja. I will mostly talk about them in the fact that they are in extreme conservation trouble. There's a non-migratory population in Florida that I'm not going to talk about at all. And there are monarchs weirdly other places. There's like invasive monarchs in Hawaii. So I want to say a little bit about Mexico because I am going to talk about so much about what's happening in the Midwest. And I think some people come away with the impression that we're doing a lot here in the US and there's not a lot happening in Mexico, and that's not the case. So here, this is what it looks like from the air. This is the Omael trees, and the rust is butterflies. So they are dripping with butterflies. I will soon show you a graph of the population, which is in hectares of butterflies. And that's folks at the sanctuary in collaboration with World Wildlife Fund measure the hectares of butterflies there are. There's a sanctuary that it's a big tourism draw, both for folks inside of Mexico visiting and from tourists from outside of the country visiting. And of course, they have been struggling this year because people have not been allowed to visit. Eduardo Rondon Salinas from the Monarch Sanctuary presented to our Monarch community science volunteers at the end of the year via Zoom, which we would have never thought about probably before COVID, that we could have Eduardo talk to us through the power of technology. So a lot is happening in the Monarch Sanctuary and in Mexico for monarch conservation. And this is kind of we need to do our part. Mexico does its part, Canada does its part to really protect this species. So this is the depressing graph. So this is the eastern population. It is weird that it's in hectares, but as I said, they sort of measure the area. And there's a blue line on 6 hectares because that is some really good work by the Fish and Wildlife Service. What's been determined is the average population we need to maintain in order to protect the species long term. And that's because they make that huge migration and things can go wrong. Things like a late spring, like we're having, can actually be tough because they're stuck south of us, and there are too many generations to the south of us. Things like bad weather along the migration. Hurricane Harvey hit right during migration, and as a Houstonian, I was concerned for Texas, but very concerned for monarchs. And there can be frosts, and things can happen in Mexico that really whack the population. So we can't have just 6 hectares. We need to have on average more than that. And as you can see, it's been a long time since we've had a really good year. So what's being done? I'm not going to wait till the end of the talk to kind of say what's happening. And I think this is the most wordy and boring slide I have. But in 2014, there was a petition made to list the monarch as an endangered species. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is who deals with that in the United States. And so the Endangered Species Act is a really complicated law. There were rules about when they had to respond. And so they had to respond by 2015. And so a gentleman named Wayne Thogmartin and a ton of collaborators came up with this, that they need to have 15 acres, which is 6 hectares because we have to switch units, which would equal 225 million butterflies on average. And to do that, we would need to add 1.8 billion with a B stems of milkweed to the landscape. And it varies between 1.3 and 1.8 in literature, but it doesn't really matter because it's billion with a B. And he specifically said that it would take an all hands on deck effort, which meant that it couldn't just be something that happens in the agricultural landscape, something that happens along roadsides, something that happens in protected lands. It had to include everyone, and that included cities. And if you're a good reader, you will notice the deadline was 2020, and that did not happen. So in 2020, they had to make a final determination about whether or not to list the monarch. And we all know, so they waited till December, and we all probably remember what December 2020 looked like politically, emotionally for the country. And those things aren't supposed to be part of it. It's a science-based decision. But a lot of us were kind of like, what's going to happen? And at the same time, we were getting just really devastating population numbers. So the Western population had been something like 30,000 butterflies, and we were worried. And then they get counted in November at a Thanksgiving count, and they could only find 1,957, I think, butterflies. So we went from 30,000 to less than 2,000. And that's basically extinct. I mean, that's, if you go to California and you see a monarch butterfly, you're incredibly lucky, or probably you saw a mimic of a monarch, because there are not many of them. And the Eastern population recorded one of their 6 lowest overwintering populations ever. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service, they had been doing modeling for years, and I don't work for them, but I believe that they did really good science. I know some people, we've sort of lost some faith in government science, but they worked really hard on this. And so they determined that listing the monarch was warranted under the Endangered Species Act. There was a significant risk of losing both the Eastern and Western populations in the next 20 years, but that it was precluded by other higher priority species. And those were high priority species, but it was a little bit tough to hear that we're not going to get protection for the monarch this year. They've said that they'll revisit it in 2024. Who knows what will happen, if there will be challenges to that, how this will evolve over time. But that's kind of the legal status. And that also kind of says, we jumped in around, we invited in by the Fish and Wildlife around 2015, specifically to think about that urban sector. And I want to say one more time, 1.8 billion stems of milkweed. Well, where did they go? Like, why? I mean, what happened? So this idea that monarch population is in decline, in part because of milkweed. No one thinks it's just milkweed. There are a lot of things going on, but milkweed is an important part of that. The upper Midwest, the Corn Belt, I mean, we're the breadbasket of monarchs. Many, they can do this through genetic analysis. Many of the monarchs that make it to Mexico are born out of the Midwest. And prior to a certain time, that milkweed was probably in amongst the agricultural landscape. And milkweed was generally seen as a huge problem in agricultural landscapes, such that it is listed as a noxious weed in a lot of states. I am pretty sure it still is in Illinois, most of the I states, most of the corn production states. I know it is in Montana, where it is seen as a real problem for wildlife or for horses and cattle. It's the American Veterinary Association lists it as a dangerous plant. I know because it's really bad for horses. I don't, everyone asks me about dogs and cats, and I don't really know. It's pretty gross to eat. And so I don't think that they would ingest a lot of it, but I'm not a vet. Um, and here in the Midwest, it was growing in amongst the cornfields. And farmers fought it really hard, in part because if you hit a patch of milkweed with your combine and it's got that sticky, gooey sap and it gums up your combine and delays your harvest, that's a bad day. And Midwestern farmers have had a lot of bad days lately. And I say all of this to say the idea that it's going to move back into production agriculture isn't likely. And let me show you a little bit about why. So this is the paper that came out that sort of outlined this all hands on deck and all this modeling around where milkweed was thought to be. And so for the urban sector, this is very weird. It's in like milkweed stems per acre is the unit. Doesn't really matter. Bigger numbers mean more milkweeds. And so you can see in corn and soybeans, they're saying there ain't any and they don't think there's going to be any more. For like marginal croplands where there aren't very good production, they're actually thinking maybe we can get a lot of milkweed in here. But for cities, and when we say cities, I mean, we mean everything from the loop all the way far out to the exurban. All of our work is the entire 7-county area around Chicago. Sorry, I think my cat is throwing things under the door because he's mad that the door is closed. So what they're showing for cities initially is that we are contributing 0 milkweed to monarch conservation, which those of us living in cities were like, well, boo, that's not the case. Like, I know that there's milkweed here. I've seen it. And their predicted contribution from us is quite low. And so we took exception to that, and we were asked by Fish and Wildlife to look into that. How much was in cities and what was the potential? And so we did. And part of it is you can't blame folks who work in national conservation for kind of thinking cities are worthless, because up until recently, this is the data that we had to look at the landscape. This is a national landscape data that comes out every like 4 to 6 years. And it characterizes every 30 by 30 meter square in the lower 48 states. And varying shades of red just mean developed. And so Chicago looks like some sort of zombie apocalypse red outbreak sort of scary thing. And it certainly doesn't look like any place you'd want to live or have conservation. But thankfully, we have better data. And now this sort of looks like a place that I enjoy living and working. We've made buildings red in part just to highlight them. But now you have trees as this darker color green, other things that are green but not trees, and a lighter green. You can really define waterways like the river and roadways. This is data that comes from an airplane versus a satellite, so it's just more high resolution. And it allows us to go in and calculate how much of that green stuff is there. And actually, we kick trees out because monarchs don't like trees. Trees can be really important for a lot of pollinators right now, early in the spring, when there's not a lot of flowers down at the level us humans are occupying. A lot of pollinators are up in the trees because trees are flowering. But for monarchs, they don't like shady areas, and they're kind of not here when our trees are flowering. So trees turn out to not be that important for them. But we needed to figure out, okay, we can look at the entire 7-county area and decide how much green stuff is there. But what matters is what's on the ground. If all of that is just turf grass, that's not helping us out. And so we picked a ton of random blocks, like random census blocks, all throughout the 7-county area. And we made these poor students drive out there. We paid them, but they still had to drive everywhere and navigate the public way, sidewalks and streets, and tell us what was growing. everything that was flowering, everything that was blooming, all the gardens. Was there milkweed? Were there weedy plants? Were there dandelions? All of this data we had to collect to kind of understand the potential of urban landscapes for monarch butterflies. And we did. And there's a whole, it's a 17,000 word paper, so I'm going to summarize it in one graph. But what we found is something that you would expect, which is open space conservation. So like a open space that has a conservation mission, like a forest preserve. Lots of potential, lots going on there, and folks are working on that. Open space non-conservation, so like a park, open space that doesn't have a conservation mission, so like a park, but also cemeteries and golf courses. Lots of potential, lots going on there. Vacant lots, that's really complicated, so we're not working on that right now. Rights of way, you don't always think about how much land is along roadsides and under power lines, but I think ComEd is like one of the largest landholders in the state just because they own the transmission rights of way. There's a lot of potential there for monarch habitat, and there's a group out of UIC actually working on that. For many people, they have seen maybe their first and only milkweed along the center of the highway. But of course, I've highlighted residential land because that was significant potential. There's actually one thing I've left off of this graph, which is even studying just the 7-county area around Chicago. There is so much agriculture that if I included it, it would blow the axis off of this. So there is a huge possible potential in the agricultural landscape. And there are folks working on that. Our specialty in the Field Museum is urban conservation. So right now we're not thinking about that. But it is, we are very much aware that we can do a lot in urban areas, but we can't get all the way to the finish line. So residential areas are really important. And I think this ends with me saying, yeah, so we published 2 papers about this. We were really excited that they got a lot of press. It was a different special section. There was a special section on monarch conservation in 2019. And this was very exciting. We don't often publish scientific literature just because it's very time consuming. This was like most of my 2019 was writing this paper. And not so many people ever read them, but this was important because in order to be part of the listing decision for the monarch butterfly, it had to be published in peer-reviewed literature. And the outcome was sort of, so I should say, I talked a lot about Chicago. We looked at 5 cities, or 4 big cities, 3 small cities. Yeah, that's right. And extrapolated across the eastern United States and to find that under ideal conditions, cities could provide 1/3 of that 1.8 billion stems. Certainly not by 2020 because we were writing this in 2019, but there is a huge amount of potential for cities to contribute. And we were excited that, you know, it's continued to get press on into this year. Morgan Green wrote an article in March about it that we were pleased was sort of shared throughout the Tribune publishing papers. But there was one challenge. So in this, and this is how this is actually directly from the tablet we collected data from. Purple is what we couldn't see. We couldn't know what was happening in people's backyards because we didn't have permission to visit their backyards. And even as we publish these papers, we've got pushback from the monarch conservation world saying, well, okay, so maybe there's milkweed in cities, but how do we know that a monarch in the city does as well as a monarch in a cornfield, or a monarch on a roadside, or a monarch in like a Madewa National Tallgrass Prairie? What if all of those milkweeds draw monarchs to cities, they lay eggs, and they have no potential of ever becoming adult butterflies? And we said, well, yeah, that is something we need to look at. And so we need to go to all those milkweed that we found. We need to check them every week and see how the caterpillars are doing. And that means we need to get permission to enter people's private property. And so we tried for a year, like asking people. And what we quickly found is like, we can only get to so many houses in a week because then we have to go back and do them the next week. And so we really couldn't get that much data. And that brought us around to community science. What if we asked the people that live there? And I should say that while we were doing those 4 years of work to write those papers, we were also using our social scientists, and we were asking people why they planted milkweed. What do they get out of it? People who don't plant milkweed, why don't they plant milkweed? How do they feel when they see milkweed plants? What do they think about monarch conservation? And we learned from that something that's not surprising, that once people have done one conservation action, they're more likely to do others. They're more likely to become an advocate for conservation. And so we thought, well, we want to do a community science project that is about both words. We want to create a community of people doing this work and a next generation of people doing this work. And we want to get good science because that's important. We don't want to do a project where we just get science from people and we never engage with them and it feels extractive. Because again, we think that making conservationists of each of those people is important. And I just like this picture of Boris the cat, who's from our first year of the project. So I'm going to talk more about our community science project, but I want to say one more thing, that this was one of the papers in that Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences special section. And they talked about the 8 things individuals can do. And so again, this came out after we conceived of and started our project, but I like it because it encapsulates a lot of things that we try to do with our community science project. So we want people to do things like convert lawns to create native habitat. Oh, I keep forgetting this knocks the E off of advocate. I need to fix that. We want them to grow native plants. We want them to not spray those native plants with pesticides and herbicides, which would negate it. And we want them to educate people in their lives and become advocates for conservation, particularly young people in their lives. And we're also, yes, advocate legislatively for those things such that you can. And all of this is really wrapped up in reducing the negative image of insects. Sometimes when I talk to kids and stuff, I have pictures from like Winnie the Pooh where like bees are often his enemy. And they're what's tormenting him. My kid has like a magic school bus book where they're like attacked by a bumblebee, which is very hard to make happen in real life. And so I do want people across the board to think about how they can become advocates for insects who are not like, giant pandas and the most sexy conservation species. Monarchs are probably our giant panda. They're like our most sexy conservation insect. And so our project is in part, and I'll tell you the details of the project, but I want to sell the next generation part of it is big for us. So all of us at the Field Museum who created this, for the most part, have our own small children. And we do think about projects that can happen with young people. Kids are great at looking for eggs and caterpillars because they're already down there close to the ground. There's not so much bending for them. And because it's not something often that's like happening at school. Certainly right now, while school is remote and, as my kid would say, super not fun to be doing school right now. But in general, like the chance to collect your own data, and they are good at paying attention to these little, they have a lot of space in their brain. They're not worrying about taxes and car licenses. So they can really notice these things once they've been focused on them. And so, so what is the project? We ask people to monitor at home for the milkweed that they have for monarch eggs and caterpillars. We have found, so we started in 2019, Marilyn, one of our founding folks, we found that it's powerful for engagement because once people, so let me say this, we need to get people to plant milkweed, but then we have to get them to keep having it. So if we plant milkweed in a forest preserve, you can be kind of sure that it'll probably still be there in 5 years unless something goes wrong. But if you plant milkweed in somebody's yard, they could cut it down the next year. Their neighbors could complain about it. They could just decide they don't like it. It's their yard. They get to decide every day whether or not the milkweed stays or goes. And so you have to give people a reason to keep these plants around because it's not like a rose. And frankly, it's hard to find and purchase. So it's powerful to have somebody look at this plant every week for 12 weeks and collect data on it and see what's happening in that little ecosystem. And so we are asking them to monitor the caterpillars to see if they stick around, because they don't really, I mean, so a monarch egg has less than a 10% chance of being an adult, and a migratory monarch has, from egg to making it to Mexico and back, I mean, that's probably less than 5% chance that, they're going to make that whole journey. It's very perilous. So it can be like, that's probably the worst part about the project. Everyone has told us is like, you have an egg and then you get a caterpillar and then it disappears. Hopefully it became food for somebody. I mean, it did become food for somebody. And what we didn't know in 2019 was that we were creating a project that would be really compatible with COVID in 2020. It was the only field work that I'm going to say air quote did, because I did it from my house. And it was the only data collection that we really had going on for the museum. Everything else was canceled. And this is what it looks like. So red dots are 2019, yellow dots are 2020. The project grew between 2019 and 2020, in large part because of the feedback we got from the first group of folks, was really good. There were things that weren't great about the project. I think it improved for 2020, and I really think in this year we really have our legs under us, of understanding what we're doing. We actually have a coordinator, which we were supposed to have in 2020, but there was a hiring freeze. We are fully deployed in English and Spanish this year in the way that we were last year, but not as well as I would have liked. So we've had people in 10 different counties, which has been awesome, in part because from a data standpoint, I could never drive to all of these places in a week. That would be impossible. So we're getting data for a much wider area than we ever could have with having our staff do this project. But that also means that we're talking to people in 10 different counties. We have folks in Gary talking about this project. So that's awesome. This is like a zoom in on just some of our key partners. We partnered with West Cook Wild Ones and Instituto Latino. And so that was 2019, and then 2020, you kind of see our growth around the core field museum. You see, sadly, the 2 sites at the museum that we couldn't monitor in 2020 because we are not allowed on the campus. So we'll hope, we're actually not sure if we're going to be able to get museum data this year either, because right now we're not allowed to come in. So we'll see what happens. And we're seeing stuff. So from way back in 2016, when we were calculating where monarch milkweed habitat could have been in people's homes, most of these wouldn't have been part of that calculation. Certainly nothing on a balcony made it into that calculation. For the most part, community gardens weren't something that we were thinking about. I mean, we thought that was a potential, but we had no way to get data from them. Tiny little strips of habitat between the sidewalk and fence would not have been something we picked up even on that really high resolution data. This is somebody's backyard. We would have never seen this in our calculations. So in fact, our counting of going in and around cities is probably an undercount, because we couldn't see anything that was happening in the backyards. We're only getting like half of it. And we knew that. We brought that into the calculation. But a lot of this is stuff that we could not have known would exist. And people send us these photos as part of the project, and they enrich my life greatly. I mean, they were incredibly emotionally important over 2020 to be receiving all of this, like, visions into people's lives. And so what does this mean for data? And this is really early. This is 2 years of data, which is, we got a lot of data. We were happy about it, but it's really not that much from a scientific standpoint. One thing that we found, so we're comparing sites that didn't get eggs or caterpillars. And that's a thing that's hard to get people to give us data when they're not finding eggs and caterpillars, but it's really important because we are trying to understand, what does a successful site look like? And we hear from people who, I planted milkweed, I didn't get anything, so I got rid of it. And understandable, but I think we can talk about how to improve those sites, but we need to get data from them. And so one of them is that they, had a few more plants, 50 or so plants. I mean, it would be a lot if you had to buy them. As we know, milkweed spreads. but they tend to be a little more successful at the bigger sites. It didn't super matter how many different species of milkweed you had. And that's telling that if you find something that works well for your site, you can probably just plant more of it. You don't need to have different species of milkweed. But having more species of blooming plants is really important. And that's important for creating an overall pollinator garden that's going to support a lot of different species. So having more different, and so people do this by the number of plants that are blooming when they collect data. This is an optional part of the project. And this is supported by literature that the monarchs, you're not more likely to get eggs if there are more plants blooming around it, but they are more likely to survive. I think this is probably really important and something that we need to tell people more about, is that first year isn't your most successful year. The plants are still getting established. We see this in literature. My theory is that monarchs prefer plants that are more toxic. They have a secondary compound that makes them toxic to a few things but monarchs. And I think they probably are producing less of that their first year while they're trying to get established. I know my first year plants are more likely to be eaten by rabbits, and I assume that that's because they aren't as terrible tasting. Size, well, maybe is important. It's hard to say. These all fall within the like super small category of overall monarch gardens, but maybe slightly bigger than smaller. And we had thought the density, how close the plants were planted together, might be important. That comes up in the literature, but I think it's probably not in gardens of this size. And so, I think this is really where, we're excited about data like that, and we want to use data like that to tell people how to plant more successful gardens. But mainly, we want to create these advocates. And this is my kid with, these are not monarch caterpillars, these are swallowtail caterpillars. But she's excited to be keeping these swallowtail caterpillars alive while they eat mom's dill that mom now can't put in chicken salad. But she's not afraid of them. And that wasn't out of the box. Like, we had to work on this, and most of those will probably be eaten by birds, and that's important because most songbirds feed caterpillars to their young, so it's all feeding into it. And I hope she tells her friends about it. So with that, this is our site. If you want to join the project, I can drop it in the chat so it's easier to click on. We will be running trainings starting next week. We have trainings on the calendar for May. You can find them on our website. You sort of click a join button and you can join with Facebook or Google or Apple, or you can create a login. It's free. We just need the site to manage your username and password because I can't. You come in and hear me talk more about Monarchs. It's we ask you for 2 hours. The trainings are really 90 minutes. The 2 hours just make time for Q&A, and it's a round number. If May doesn't work, there'll be some in June. And then we'll be giving away milkweed at the end of June. And for people who take a training, we'll email you where the locations are, because we have milkweed to give away. We just don't have unlimited milkweed. So we need them to be for people who do the project. And if you come early, you can get a sign for your yard if you would like. So I will stop talking.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much, Erika. I know from monitoring the chat room that we have a lot of questions for you. Rosemary and Linda, you are our tag team for questions.
It's
I'm
going
sure
to be,
you have selected some already. Go for it.
It's going to be Linda and Steve. Rosemary's driving the bus. Yes, we have quite a few questions. Number one, Thomas wanted to know, what is the progress of getting these milkweed plants going? And he wants to know why horses don't like them.
So I don't know anything about horses, but I think that they can cause colic. So I've heard from people who work out in ranch lands that if they get milkweed growing in the pasture, they often disc it up because it's really bad, I think, with the like multi-chambered stomach. I mean, the plant is trying to be toxic. It doesn't want to be eaten. And so in the same way that like tomatoes are a nightshade, and you shouldn't eat like a whole tomato plant. Milkweeds, they do have this really sticky latexy sap. I think that they're probably not very palatable, but horses and cows will eat a lot of things. I mean, the league, like, so I do know, like, officially in Chicago, milkweed plants would violate the landscaping ordinance because I think it says no non-trees or shrubs over 18 inches. In practice, and people do get ticketed in various municipalities for this. We used to have a whole map of like what was happening in each municipality with the legal status of having milkweed. I think the practice has been that if you have a garden that looks kind of kempt, you are unlikely to be targeted. But if it looks a little more unkempt or wild, sometimes people do get targeted for sort of fines or being told they have to take the plants out. And hopefully that evolves over time.
Steve, do you want to take the one from Marion? Unmute. Unmute. Oh, okay, I'll have to take it. He seems to be voiceless. Marion Cartwright wants to know, you had a graph up, and what species of milkweed was the grass addressing? Common milkweed or other species, and are monarchs particular to one or the other?
It's a great question. So from our data, we have the most data from common milkweed because it is the most common. And so there's a little bit of bias in that. From our data, common milkweed is by far the powerhouse. We see the most eggs and caterpillars on common milkweed. We also see the most common milkweed, so there can be a little bit of bias in there. Usually what I tell people is the best milkweed to plant is the one that you're willing to have. And some people don't feel great about having a common milkweed in front of their house. I have them between my garage and my alley, which is good because they are the most truly weedy and they will spread and they will take over if they are happy. And I am more than happy to let them live between my garage and alley, and they can't really spread into the alley. So it's a good standoff. I have swamp milkweed, or rose milkweed is its other name, and butterfly milkweed in my front yard, where they both grow happily and are a little more contained. Butterfly milkweed doesn't grow everywhere. It's of the more commonly available milkweeds. One of the more finicky to grow, it likes a sandier soil. If you have like the heavy clay, it probably won't be happy. So it's a little bit about finding what works for you, because at this point we're just saying, please plant milkweed. And but if you are cool with, like, I showed a picture of somebody that has common milkweed in their front yard and it's like 5-6 feet tall, and I think it looks great. And so that could be good. I do think having, we say you can do the project with one milkweed, and we get people who have an egg that becomes a caterpillar that becomes an adult monarch in the project on one milkweed plant. And we'd want data from those. In general, the advice is to have more like 5 to 12 plants to have a more likely to be successful patch.
Thank you. Forgive me. I think this lady is Lucianne, and she has a good question. Is it harmful for concerned people to collect the eggs and to raise them indoors? She apparently surveys areas and estimates that 99% of the eggs fall to predation in Chicago. And that's based on 2 years of searching for eggs and caterpillars. And she said she found only 2 healthy, fat caterpillars ready to go into chrysalis. I think everybody knows of people who capture them, take them inside, and what's the word on doing this?
Yeah, so sometimes this is called head starting or hand rearing. For our project, you can sort of separate your yard into patches. So you could like monitor for our project in the backyard And that can be good if you have like a lot of plants and you don't want to count like 500 milkweed plants. That would be too much. And so we ask that people who are doing our project don't collect eggs and caterpillars from those patches, because it would mess up our data, because we are calculating how many eggs make it through each. They have like 5 stages before they're like big fat caterpillars and then might form a chrysalis. And so that would mess up our data. So we ask people not to collect from those. I know people, lots of people Head Start. I know people who do our project and they can't stand watching eggs disappear, and they stop because they want to hand rear them. In general, that certainly, especially doing it with to have that experience of rearing a caterpillar, it's a really powerful, awesome experience. And I've said, having a one conservation experience is a way to lead yourself to do more. And so I encourage that. The commercial rearing of monarchs is almost certainly a problem. There are places that raise 5,000 monarchs. You can like get them to release at your wedding. Please don't do that. That's probably really bad for monarchs. Doing a handful for yourself is awesome, especially doing it as a project with students. The Monarch Joint Venture, and I can put it into the chat. It's a weird name for a nonprofit. They have great information on their website about how to Head Start and how to do it in a way that's because there are monarch diseases that can spread, and the ways to control and reduce those. Yeah, I'll see if I can find the exact one.
Perhaps you could put that in the chat for us.
Yeah, let me grab that. Well, I can answer questions while I do it.
Well, Steve, do you want to take Marion's question? I don't think he's working again. Marion wants to know, Marion Cartwright, thank you, Marion. Any research done about ants guarding milkweed from other insects, including guarding monarch eggs and caterpillars?
So not by me, but in the literature, there are some poor grad student put a camera on monarch eggs and filmed what happened to them and watched all of that video. And ants were a predator of monarch eggs. Ants also are predators on aphids, which are frequently found on milkweed.
Turn your volume up.
So it's definitely a thing. Generally, what we say is, if you have sort of an overabundance of some sort of pest in your milkweed patch, if you wait a couple weeks, something else will take over and eat that pest. And one thing is, we ask people to monitor June, July, and August. And the powerhouse month by a large margin is July. And that's why we're kind of okay with people. If you don't do the training in May and you do it in June, we're still going to get that key for, and we need ideally 4 consecutive weeks. So getting all of July is ideal for us. And so there can be, hard early June weeks where I'm not seeing caterpillars make it past, the first few days. But then once there are more and more of them, they're kind of overwhelmed that predation. They are succeeding in June, and they're present into August. And I know I'm having migratory caterpillars born. So we were worried about whether or not people would be willing to collect data for us every week. And in fact, what we often find is people are looking, once they get a caterpillar, more like every day and just giving us data every week. And it can be hard to lose your little buddy caterpillar. But it is very helpful for us to understand what's going on, so we can help talk about how to make more successful gardens, because nobody knows. Nobody's doing this work in cities.
Well, hats off to you for including citizens. I think it's the only way forward. If we want them in the future, we've got to encourage this. I think I have one last question, unless one just popped up. Marilyn, who is herself quite knowledgeable about the monarch, wants to know if the abatement of mosquitoes is going to have a harmful effect on the monarchs.
Yeah. So So the like mosquito abatement district is often putting granules in the storm drains because that's where the mosquito that's like most biting and spreads West Nile. They're targeting them as larvae. And that's fine for monarchs. I am no expert on what that does to any other part of the ecosystem. But when somebody is bringing out a company, and sometimes municipalities do this, and spraying like the trees, they're often using Promethean, which is what I use to keep ticks off of me when I do field work. And if you buy like a mosquito shirt, that's usually treated with Promethean, and it's very effective for ticks. Anyone out doing field work, ticks are out there. They're voracious this year. I don't want Lyme disease, so I do treat my clothes with Promethean, but I don't treat my plants with Promethean because that does target monarchs for sure. We know this. And so trucks spraying, driving up and down the street and spraying can be a problem. It's a tough thing because also we want people to go outside and enjoy nature, and mosquitoes are not fun. They are pollinators, but they are not fun. And so that we have people who in part they keep milkweed more in their backyard, so it's further away from that spraying. Planting between the sidewalk and the street, that strip of often grass has many different names. My favorite being Hell Strip. I grew up calling it the city easement. People call it the parkway. I don't know, that thing. Can be a tempting place to plant habitat. And I'm always a fan of planting habitat, but that can also be a place that's really hit with spraying. Common milkweed seems to like salt or not hate salt. So if, and that's an area that can get a lot of road salt in it. It's often illegal to plant plants over 18 inches there in a lot of municipalities. So do what seems right.
Thank you. We do have one more. Jeannie wants to know if she has common butterfly plant. Is that good for milkweeds? I mean, for monarchs.
So it's a little tricky because there's butterfly bush, which is a non-native plant, and butterfly milkweed. Butterfly milkweed has orange flowers. Asclepias tuberosa is the scientific name. And so Google photo, if it's Asclepias tuberosa, and mine, so I'm in Evanston, about a mile in from the lake, and my Asclepias tuberosa is like this big. So sort of calculate how warm it is where you are. And if you're like to the south of me, it's probably bigger. If you're north and closer to the lake, it might not be up yet. But that's the one. So it's anything in the Asclepias genus. I will drop one more thing in the chat, which is going to get better. So we have these photo guides that to different things. And we have one about creating monarch habitat in your Midwestern yard. And it's actually going to get a lot better in a couple of weeks because we just revised it. But it has pictures of all of these plants, which can be really helpful because it's, you don't always know. And these are free. There's like over 50 of them on here. They're always free to take and use in any way. You just can't sell them. They're Creative Commons licensed. So in a second, I'll drop the link to it in the chat. I'm having to scroll.
Thank you. And one final question, final question from me is anyone doing any research on the effects of climate change on the monarch, specifically the monarch?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's part of, I guess maybe I didn't get exactly back to that drawing, but yeah, I mean, migration is one of aside from milkweed, so one of the big determinants of how big that monarch overwintering population is actually already happened. It's how many spring flowers are there in northern Mexico and in Texas, because they've come north, they have to breed and reproduce, and they have to have flowers for the adults. And so when it's a drought in the Southwest, that's when we get those cripplingly low numbers. And part of the reason we talk so much about, being the breadbasket of monarchs is we got to get the population as big as we can, because it's not like we can water Texas. That's climate change. And that is probably a huge, so milkweed isn't probably the biggest determiner of the crash in the Western population. That's probably climate change, because we're seeing those effects more heavily in those already arid places. By the way, if you want a trip, look at our milkweeds and then look at the milkweeds in like Arizona. They look like completely unrelated plants. Also California was impacted. Like some of the overwintering grounds were burned in the fires. But probably that is climate change, and it's not that planting 1.8 billion stems of milkweed is an easy solution, but it's a lot easier than for the Western population. It's like fix global climate change, which is hard for any one individual to do. That is going to be a global effort, hopefully.
Excellent.
Well, we have one last, and I promise this is the last question from Carrie. And Carrie, I think your question is going to be answered in just a minute. She wants to know how we can start a citizen science project in her area. And I believe Bruce is going to talk about that.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, Erika. And
Erika,
I think Tom's going to have some things now, but thank you so much.
Erika, thank you so much. This is a far more complex issue than I ever thought it was. I mean, there are just a lot of moving parts on this whole interplay of insects and plants and humans and development and whatnot.
I like messy problems.
We want to turn to Bruce Glickson, a longtime member of the Sierra Club who heads up our Monarch initiatives, and Marilyn Fish, who's also an expert. Marilyn, if you have anything to add, chime in. But I think Bruce wants to take the lead on this, or Marilyn is giving the lead to Bruce or whatever. So Bruce, let's turn it over to you for a few minutes and tell our audience what is going on here in Lake County.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Erika, thank you for this very informative, wonderful presentation. I'm the chair of the Milkweed for Monarch Survival Campaign, part of the Woods and Wetlands group in Lake County. And what we do using the National Wildlife Federation and the Illinois Monarch Project pledges that you can find online under those headings, nwf.org or imp.org. Their pledges encompass things that you can do as individuals or within organizations to promote the planting of milkweed. And we also work to educate the public and private sectors on the importance of milkweed and native nectar flowers for the monarch and all pollinators. This season, we have several gardens that we are putting in at houses of worship and other locations around the area. We partner and collaborate with several other monarch groups, including Go Green in Northbrook, Vernon Hills, Glenview. We've talked with the Rotary clubs, all good and active environmental groups. So our next Milkweed for Monarch Survival Campaign meeting is going to be held on Zoom Monday, May 17th at 7 o'clock. You can register for that on campfire.sierraclub.org, just like you did for this evening's meeting. You'll get the Zoom link when you register. Or you can contact me at bgmonarchs@gmail.com. Please attend our meeting. We welcome your ideas, your comments, your knowledge and expertise. We look forward to having you help us achieve our goals and activities in the 2021 season. Last year was, as for everyone, not very active, but we look to certainly work on that more this year. Thank you again, Marilyn. Thank you again, Erika. Marilyn did suggest Erika for this presentation. Thank you, Marilyn. And we look forward to the next month's speaker. I was asked to mention this, Doug, Thomas, if you're going to do it also. Our next speaker is June 13th. It's called Camping for Newbies with Nick Snyder, who's from REI. So thank you again for everyone for joining us. Wonderful evening.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bruce. And thank you, Marilyn, for finding Erika. And Erika, thank you very much for a very informative presentation. Once again, Bruce's email is B as in boy, G, monarchs with an S on the end @gmail.com. And you can register for the May 17th meeting by going to campfire.sierraclub.org. Now, before we adjourn for the evening, please mark your calendars as follows, as Bruce mentioned a moment ago. On June 13, Nick Snyder, the manager of the REI store in Vernon Hills, is going to speak to us on camping for newbies. He's going to explain to us how to get started on outdoor camping. On July 11, Najeen Almasi, a naturalist for the, whoops, lost my notes here, just a minute, excuse me. On July 11th, Najeen Almasi, a naturalist for the Cook County Forest Preserves, will invite us to tune our ears to the singing insects as she uses musical instruments to mimic the sounds of insects that we hear in summertime. That should be fun. On August 8th, Patty Vitt, the manager of ecological restoration for the Lake County Forest Preserves, will share her current research on the effects of global warming in Lake County. On September 12, our very own Gloria Charland and Jim Bland will speak on toxic blue-green algae in Lake County's lakes. And on October 10, Ann Lacey from the International Crane Foundation will be with us to speak on efforts to preserve all 15 species of crane worldwide. So thank you for joining us on another Woods and Wetlands Speakers Meeting. We hope you will get involved, and we hope to see you again next month. Thank you very much, everyone. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much.